Why there is war, told from a soldier's quiet bed. I speak softly because the room is small and the night is listening. The boards beneath my bunk remember every boot that passed here, and even now, when I turn to the side, the wood sighs, like an old friend who has learned my weight. The lamp on the crate throws a circle of honey-colored light over the pages I never finished writing. Outside, a moth taps the window with the care of a timid messenger. It wants in. Everyone does. Eventually, even the wind. People ask me, sometimes only with their eyes, why is there war? They expect a map or a law, a word that fits in a pocket. I have none. I have only the bed, this quiet, and the stories that creak when I breathe. So I answer the only way I know, slowly, like someone folding a flag so it doesn't wake the tide. House, war exists, I think, because the human heart is larger than our chests and smaller than our patience. It presses outward and inward until something splits. When I was a boy, my mother used to say that anger is a kettle with no lid. Didn't understand? I do now. You can keep a kettle from boiling over by lifting it, by letting steam roam the kitchen and fog the cold window, by admitting the heat is there and needs a way out. We learned, instead, to clamp the lid, to pretend the flame was small. But the water remembers fire. So does a nation. I lay a palm over the wool blanket and feel the drumbeat that isn't a drum, my pulse. In the trenches, the real drum stopped because they gave us away, but the pulse kept time. You learn, if you live long enough, that every heartbeat is a summons to choose, to carry, or to put down, to speak, or to listen, to raise your hand, or to reach your hand. Somewhere between those pairs, a gap opens, and if we don't bridge it with mercy, we bridge it with metal. There was a man in my unit, Rojas, who played cards without counting. He called it trusting the river. He would watch the faces instead, the little flinches around the eyes when the bet grew fat. War is a big table, he told me on our second week at the front, and everybody thinks they can read everybody. I asked who wins. He said, the one who realizes it isn't a game. I didn't understand that either, till the night when flares climbed and fell like tired stars and the horizon flashed its teeth. I saw then how much of our trouble comes from pretending our fear is strategy. We gamble with people we've never met. It is easier to bet on a shadow than to ask its name. Why is there war? Because names are heavy. Because to say child is harder than to say collateral. Because the mouth can learn to pronounce smoke. I turn, and the wool whispers. It's the ones who snore in the long building next door used to sing. We all did in the first weeks. The songs uppered the pain, lifted it so it thought it was a bird. We believed that if pain was flying, it was leaving us. But it was only circling, learning our contours. Later, when winter came and the ground surprised us with how firm it could be, we stopped sinking. The quiet turned us into mirrors. We saw ourselves tired, stubborn, carrying photographs that had become talismans. You begin to suspect that war exists because we are terrified of mirrors, because silence tells the truth at an inconvenient volume. Earlier this evening, I wrote a letter I won't send. Dear boy I used to be, I began. I hope you never learn how to clean a rifle by feel. I told him that the world will hand him words like glory, honor, and home, and he will try to wear them all at once. They will not fit. Something will tear. He will blame the seam. But it is his shoulders that have changed, widened by grief, rounded by empathy. If I fold the letter carefully and leave it by the lamp, perhaps the moth will carry it to him. Or perhaps it will burn its wings in the light, like we did in the speeches. There is another answer that I do not want to give, but the bed has a way of asking for honesty. War persists because someone profits from the smoke. There are men who can read steel the way sailors read the sky. They can smell the weather in the market and know exactly how much rain a field can tolerate before the crop is theirs. But even this calculation, this arithmetic of other people's sons, is not the root. It is a symptom, the way a fever admits infection. The route is older, humbler, sitting at the kitchen table of every childhood where fear learned to wear a uniform, fear of not enough, fear of not being seen, fear that love is a ration. When I was small, my father and I planted 3 apple trees near the fence. He showed me how to press the dark seeds into the soil, how to cover them with loose earth, not too tight, so air could keep secrets with water. You can't force an apple, he said. You can only invite one. Years later, standing in a field far from that fence, I watched a different invitation, the kind that arrives with a convoy and a flag. It was not a question, he accepted. Anyway, I believed then that we were planting safety. But the harvest looked like helmets stacked on a bench by the door. Apples rot quietly, harm rots loudly, rot is rot. It all begins where the hand forgets it is a hand and thinks it is a hammer. I listen to the building breathe. Beds are faithful. They remember your weight and forgive your absence. When we left for patrol, my blanket waited without complaint, and when I returned, it did not ask where I had been. I think peace is like that, the room that keeps your place. War is the hallway, long, echoing, full of boots, full of alarms and orders and names shouted until the syllables blister. We imagine the hallway is the house because the hallway is noisy. We forget the quiet room at the end is where we sleep. I'm trying to walk there now, step by step, without waking the ones who finally found rest. Another reason whisper it, 'cause reasons get rowdy when they hear themselves. War exists because we inherit it like furniture, scratched, sturdy, awkward to move, full of the ghosts of meals we never ate. We inherit it in stories told at tables where knuckles whiten around forks. We inherit it in the way maps are drawn with thick lines and thicker pride. If you have ever watched an elder trace their finger across a map and stop at a border as if it were made of thorns, you know how easily a nation can be turned into a family secret. Don't cross. The secret grows teeth. Children grow into teeth. But there is a softer inheritance too, and I keep it under my pillow, a little book with pressed leaves. We collected them in spring the year before the first siren, my sister and I, a maple, like a hand, an oak, like a small, brave shield. When I couldn't sleep in the field, I would open to the leaf that had managed to keep its green, as if it had refused to surrender the summer in its veins. I would hold it up to the weak trench, light until the veins glowed like a map, not of countries, but of kindnesses. If you want to know why war exists, begin with what we fail to press and keep. We preserve metals, we forget green. The moth has found a seam in the sash, squeezes through like a thought I almost didn't have. K circles the lamp once, twice, makes up its mind, and rests on the glass. K, its small body throws a magnified shadow against my letter. The shape looks like a bird caught in amber. I laugh quietly, so the sleeping do not mistake happiness for danger, and I tell the moth my theory. War exists because we practice it in miniature. Every time we choose heat over light, every time we win an argument and lose a person, every time we guard our certainty like a border and deny visas to wonder, is there a cure? The room seems to ask. Beds are good at questions. My answer is not clever. I think the cure starts with learning the names of things we want to fight. Fear, for instance. Shame, the kind of grief that makes a closed fist feel like a home. You can't negotiate with a blur. When I first met fear in the doorway of a burned barn, I didn't recognize it. It wore a uniform that looked like mine and whispered strategy. It took months and the loss of a friend who had a laugh like a waterfall to realize I had been saluting a mirage. I blow out the lamp, and the darkness arrives like a blanket that's been waiting all day. In the afterglow, the moth becomes only the idea of a moth's small persistence in the air. Some moonlight slides onto the floor, a silver river passing under my bed on its way to somewhere gentler than maps. I think of the river near our apple trees, how it knew which curve to keep and which to abandon. Water learns by listening, my father said once, skimming a flat stone. Perhaps peace does too. Perhaps the first practice of peace is shutting the lid on the kettle and then lifting it again, emitting the steam, naming it aloud, letting the window fog until our faces vanish and we are only breathing. Someone coughs in the next building and the sound thins into a hush. I let my hand dangle off the bed, palm open to the cool air. It is a small gesture, but it feels like placing an unarmed flag outside a door. Welcome, whoever you are who crosses this threshold. If we did only that opened our hands, not as surrender, but as invitation, how many doors would forget they were doors and remember they were thresholds? I do not know why there is war in a way that would satisfy a courtroom. Only know the evidence that fits in a cot. The way grief becomes a language if you practice it long enough. The way silence is not empty but crowded with unsent letters. The way the body, even when exhausted, reaches for warmth like a prayer that refuses to learn the word no. I know that every soldier carries a small museum, a ticket stub, a ribbon, a pressed leaf, a photograph that lost a corner in the rain. We are curators of the almost lost. Perhaps war exists because the world has not yet learned to build museums large enough for the tenderness it keeps misplacing. The night deepens. Sleep comes like a medical patient, unimpressed by heroics, interested only in what can be saved. As my eyes slip, I find one last answer, slight as the wing beat on the window. War exists because we forget that inside every uniform, there is a forehead that loves to be kissed. When we remember, the hallway shortens, a pume at the end brightens. The bed, faithful as ever, makes space for one more breathing body. Tomorrow I will write to the boy I was again and tell him something simple. You don't owe the fire your face. And then, before dawn, I will walk to the river behind the barracks and try to listen the way water does until the question why dissolves, and only the work of gentleness remains. For now, I close my eyes. The moth settles. The window cools. The world, still out in places I cannot fix, leans its ear toward this small room, and for a few hours learns to whisper back. The night has its own temperature, different from the day. It isn't just the coolness, it's the way the air settles on the skin like a second, gentler blanket. I wake to it before the trumpet calls, before boots scrape the wooden floor. My eyes open slowly, letting the darkness finish its sentence. Somewhere, far off, an owl moves its head to listen, not to pray, but to the breathing of the earth. I imagine its ears catching the sound of my pulse, carrying it to the trees. They will ask me again today, in some form, why is there war? It may be in a recruit's awkward joke, in a chaplain's sermon, in the quiet questions a medic asks without speaking. I will answer again, in pieces, never all at once, because truth is heavy. I've learned not to hand someone the whole weight in a single breath. This morning, the boards under my bed remember last night's dream. In it, I was walking home, no uniform, no pack, just to my own feet on a dirt road lined with poplar trees. Their leaves were trembling, not from wind, but from the anticipation of rain. And somewhere ahead, I could hear laughter, the kind you don't hear in war, not because people stop laughing, but because laughter here has a different flavor, shorter, sharp-edged, used more for survival than joy. In the dream, the laughter was round, like bread, fresh from the oven. I woke before I reached it. Maybe war exists because too many of us wake before the good part. I swing my legs over the edge of the bed and sit, elbows on knees, palms covering my face. The quiet between my breaths feels older than me. I think about the first time I held a rifle. It wasn't here, or even in training. It was on a summer hillside at my uncle's farm. He had an old hunting rifle, rusted at the edges, the wood worn smooth. He placed it in my hands like a secret he didn't trust the world to keep. "Heavy, isn't it?" he asked. I nodded, though my arms were younger, stronger than they are now. I realized now the weight wasn't in the metal. It was in the history. The weapon carried the animals it had killed, the meals it had fed, the arguments it had silenced. We forget sometimes that every object has a memory, and maybe war happens when we collect too many objects that remember harm. Outside, the camp stirs boots on gravel, voices low, the clang of a pot. My bunk is still warm, and I think about staying in it, letting the world pass me like a slow river. But war doesn't wait for sleepers. It reaches into their dreams, pulls them by the ankles, and sets them down where the air smells of powder. Still, I stay a little longer. I tell myself it's because my legs ache. But really, it's because the bed is the only place here that doesn't demand a side. Beds have no flags. Last week, I wrote in my notebook, war exists because it's easier to teach someone how to march than how to forgive. I closed the page quickly, as if the ink might burn through. Forgiveness is a strange country. There are no clear borders, no maps you can trust. You cross into it by accident. Sometimes, old enemies photograph in a market stall, the sound of a child's voice in a language you were taught to fear. Other times, you try to enter and find the gates locked, the guards asleep. I have seen whole battalions die outside those gates. We left for patrol yesterday before dawn. The road was damp, smelling of iron and leaves. I counted the steps between my own boots and those of the man ahead. Rojas again, humming something without words. The horizon was pale, indecisive. We passed an abandoned house. The windows were gone, the door leaning like a tired soldier. But inside, on the far wall, someone had painted a tree. Not a crude drawing. This was careful work. Branches reaching up and out, roots curling deep into the earth. No leaves, just the trunk and the sky above it. I stood there longer than I should have, staring. It felt like the wall was trying to remember a season it never lived. Maybe war exists because we forget that walls too can hold trees. When we returned, mud on our boots and silence on our tongues, I sat on the steps of the barracks and watched the sun slide away. A boy too young for the lines in his forehead sat beside me. He didn't speak for a while. Then, "Do you think it will end soon?" I wanted to tell him yes, to give him a blanket of certainty to sleep under. But the truth is, war is not a fire you can smother in a single night. It's more like the frost that comes back every morning, even after the sun. So I told him, it will end for you sooner if you know what you want to see when it does. He nodded, as if the sentence made sense. Gan walked away. It struck me later, maybe war exists because we prepare for endings without imagining what comes after. Now, in the stillness before the next trumpet, I think of my mother's kitchen. The table was always covered with a cloth, even when it was stained. She said the cloth was not to hide the marks, but to keep them from deepening. A table remembers every hand that presses on it, she told me. I wonder if countries are like that, layering new cloths over old stains, hoping no one will look too closely, hoping no one will notice that beneath the fabric, the wood is tired. Yesterday, I saw a small act that didn't belong to war. Near the mess tent, two soldiers were arguing over something I couldn't hear. The younger one's hands were fists, the older one's voice sharp. Then, without warning, the older soldier reached into his pocket, pulled out a small wrapped sweet. and placed it in the younger one's palm. The fight ended without a word. I thought about it all night. Maybe war exists because we forget how quickly sweetness can end a battle. The bugle sounds now, soft but insistent. I rise, the boards groaning under my weight. My bed exhales. I smooth the blanket, as if tucking it in for the day. Before I step outside, I glance back at the moth from last night. It's gone, leaving only a faint smudge on the window pane. I wonder if it found another light, or if it learned to rest in the dark. Either way, it is gone without ceremony, and maybe that is the closest answer I have today. War exists because we insist on ceremony for victory, but not for leaving things in peace. The night has changed its sound. It's quieter, yes, but in a way that feels like the silence is leaning in, curious. Outside, the wind has stopped carrying the metallic scent of gun oil. The air tastes faintly of pine, as if the trees have decided to speak again. I lie here, my hands resting on my stomach, and watch the way the lamplight dances in the glass of the window. Every so often, a shadow crosses a guard, making his rounds. A bird settling on the sill, the ghost of a thought I had once in a field. The bed feels heavier tonight, as though it knows what I am about to say, because here, in the last stretch of wakefulness before sleep takes me, I am closer than I have ever been to understanding why there is war. It begins, I think, with the stories we choose to tell, not the ones we whisper to children before they sleep, the ones we rehearse in speeches, in parades, in the polished lines of a history book. Those stories are like metals, shiny on one side, hollow on the other. We keep retelling them because they are easy to wear. But the true stories, the ones that smell like wet wool, that remember the taste of dust, that hear the echo of a mother's voice through the static of a broken radio, those are harder to lift. And maybe war exists because those stories are too heavy for most to carry. I remember the first man I saw after a battle whose eyes refused to return to the present. He sat on the ground, knees pulled to his chest, staring at something beyond the tree line. I knelt beside him and asked what he saw. He didn't answer. Only after a long while did he whisper, "It's not there anymore." And I realized he wasn't talking about the enemy or the field. He meant the thing inside him that had been keeping him whole. When that vanishes, it's hard to remember why peace matters. Maybe war exists because too many of us lose that peace and no one teaches us how to find it again. This bed creaks when I roll to my side, the wool blanket warm against my cheek. I think of my grandmother's bed, the one with the patchwork quilt. Each square was made from scraps of old clothing: my mother's blue dress, my uncle's work shirt, my aunt's apron. She said that sleeping under it meant sleeping under the whole family. When she died, the quilt was folded and put away in a cedar chest. I wonder if a nation is like that: pieces of fabric sewn together, each with its own story, its own wear. War, then, would be the moment someone decides a square is no longer worth keeping and tears it away. I once asked an old colonel why wars start. He gave me a long answer about politics, supply lines, alliances. Then he lowered his voice and said, "But mostly, it's because people forget how to live together without keeping score." I've thought about that ever since. Maybe he was right. Maybe war is just the scoreboard we build when we don't know how to measure kindness. The wind has returned, but it's gentle now, brushing the walls like a friend's hand on your shoulder. I remember another hand a child's grip in mine in a village where the streets were lined with broken doors. She had eyes the color of burnt sugar and a voice that could barely rise above the dust. She didn't ask for food or water. She asked, "Are you leaving soon?" I nodded, though I didn't know if it was true. She let go of my hand and pointed to the mountains. "The snow will come early," she said, in her voice. I heard the truth. The war had taught her to watch the sky more closely than the calendar. Perhaps war exists because we have trained too many children to read the clouds for danger instead of rain. The lantern flickers. It's small. Flame has been burning for hours, stubborn against a draft. I wonder how many lanterns like it are glowing tonight in enemy camps, in villages far from the front, in homes where someone is waiting for footsteps that will never come. Light doesn't care whose side you're on. It only cares that darkness doesn't win completely. Hey, and maybe that's why I can still sleep, because even here, light and dark take turns. They haven't learned the greed that keeps a war going. I write in my notebook. War exists because we keep building walls higher than our bridges. Then I close it because the truth is both obvious and exhausting. You can spend your whole life trying to build one good bridge and find it torn down in a night. But if enough of us build quietly, without ceremony, maybe the walls will tire before we do. I lie back, eyes tracing the knot in the wood above my head. It looks like a spiral, a slow curve inward. It reminds me of the way my father used to cut bread, turning the loaf in his hands, slicing toward the center. He said the middle was always softer, worth the patience. Maybe people are like that too. War happens when we forget to be patient enough to reach each other's center. The trumpet will call again in a few hours. But for now, the world has gone still enough to hear my own heartbeat. And I decide, as sleep begins to take me, that my answer to why there is war is simple and unfinished, because we are still learning how to choose gentleness before we are forced to. And with that thought, let the darkness come not as an enemy, but as a guest. The night has a way of folding itself around the smallest sounds. Tonight is the ticking of my watch, the same one I've carried since before my first march. Its face is scratched, the leather band softened by sweat and rain. It has seen more nights like this than I can count. Keep it wound, not because I need to know the time, but because the steady ticking reminds me that something in this world still moves at a pace I can trust. War moves too fast in some moments, too slow in others, but the watch, it stays honest. I think sometimes that war exists because we've forgotten how to move at an honest pace. Today, the air was cold enough to turn breath into brief ghosts. We stood in formation as the sun pulled itself slowly over the horizon. Someone behind me coughed, the sound echoing through the stillness like a small stone dropped into a deep well. And as we stood there, I thought about how many mornings I've greeted in uniform, how many times I've been told where to stand, when to speak, when to move. I've learned discipline here. Yes, I have also learned how easy it is to replace thought with orders. Maybe war exists because it's easier to follow a command than to question it after breakfast. I walked alone to the edge of camp. There's a fence. There are nothing more than wooden posts and thin wire, but beyond it, a meadow stretches toward the tree line. The grass is pale gold now, bending under the weight of frost. I stood there for a long time, my boots in the mud, my breath making small clouds in the air. I imagined lying down in that meadow, the cold soaking through my coat, sky above stretching so far it would make the war feel small. That's the thing no one tells you. Peace doesn't always feel like a celebration. Sometimes it feels like a vast, empty meadow waiting for you to remember what to do with it. This afternoon, while sorting supplies, I found an old envelope tucked behind a crate. Inside was a single photograph, sepia-toned, the edges curling. Two men in uniforms older than mine stood with their arms slung over each other's shoulders, smiling as if the world had already ended and they had survived it. I don't know who they were or where they stood, but their smiles were the kind that made you believe in mornings again. I put the photo in my pocket. Maybe war exists because we forget to carry proof that happiness can survive a battlefield. As the day closed, a light snow began to fall. It's the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself with wind, just drifts down as if the sky has decided to forgive the earth for a while. I walked back to the barracks under that snow, each flake a tiny surrender. My boots made no sound. I thought then, perhaps war exists because we keep mistaking surrender for weakness, when sometimes it's the strongest choice we can make. Now, back in my bunk, I run my fingers over the spine of my notebook. The pages are filled with answers that don't answer enough, questions that will outlive me. I write one more line before blowing out the lamp. War exists because we haven't learned to protect tenderness with the same urgency we protect territory. The watch ticks on the snow piles softly on the roof. My breathing slows to match the rhythm of something older than war. And somewhere in the distance, I imagine another soldier lying in another bed, asking the same question into the dark. The snow is still falling when I wake, though I don't remember falling asleep. The room is dim, the lamp cold, my breath a faint cloud in the early light. Someone down the hall is whistling slow, uneven, like they're trying to remember a song they once knew by heart. I stay still, letting the sound reach me. Out here, music arrives in small doses, but when it comes, it's like a letter without a stamp, somehow finding its way anyway. I think of the last letter I received from my sister. She wrote in big, careful letters so her children could help read it. "Do you know why the wind changes?" she asked. "'Cause the trees talk to it." I smiled when I read that, not because it's true, but because it feels true, maybe. That's the difference between war and peace. War asks for facts. Peace allows for stories. And maybe war exists because we've forgotten how to let truth be gentle. This morning, a boy in our unit asked me what the first thing I'll do when I get home will be. I said I'd take off my boots and walk barefoot in the grass. He laughed, like it was a strange answer. But boots have a way of hardening more than just your soles. After enough marches, enough gravel and mud, you start to forget the feeling of earth on skin. And I wonder perhaps war exists because too many of us forget what it's like to touch the ground softly after breakfast. I walked to the far side of camp where the fence ends in a crooked post. Beyond it, the snow was unbroken, a clean sheet. No one had signed. I stood there for a long time, letting the cold bite my cheeks, watching the wind lift small swirls of white into the air. It felt like the world was handing me a page and saying, "Here, write something worth keeping." But war doesn't leave much space for writing worth keeping. It leaves lists, orders, numbers. Perhaps that's another reason it exists, because we filled our pages with tallies instead of poems. Back in the barracks, I found the photograph again, the two soldiers with their arms slung over each other's shoulders. I stared at their faces, trying to read the story behind their smiles. Did they know they would be remembered only in a photograph? Did they care? Or were they just glad to have that moment together, unbroken by orders or gunfire? War exists, maybe because we plan for victories, but not for moments like that. This evening, I helped repair the stove in the mess tent. My hands are clumsy with tools, but the warmth that followed was worth every scraped knuckle. As the fire caught, a glow filled the room, and the men's voices softened. You could almost pretend we were somewhere else, a cabin in the woods, a family gathering after a long day. The war was still out there, but for a few hours, it didn't matter. And I thought, maybe the reason war exists is because we underestimate how much peace can be built with something as simple as warmth. Now, I'm back in my bed, the snow still falling beyond the window. My watch ticks steadily. The lamp is lit again, its glow spilling over the pages of my notebook. I write, slowly, careful not to wake the others. War exists because we keep believing we can teach people to love by showing them what we hate. Tonight, the cold is sharp enough to make the air feel brittle. Each breath leaves me a small cloud that hangs for a heartbeat before fading into the dark. The lamp is turned low, not because I'm conserving oil, but because I don't want the light to push too hard against the quiet. There's a kind of respect in letting the night keep most of its shadows. I've been thinking about the boy I used to be, the one who could spend hours lying in the grass, staring at the clouds and pretending there were continents floating above the earth. Back then, my wars were imagined, grand battles between dragons and knights, always ending with the villain gone and the hero standing in the sun. I never wondered what the hero did after the cheering stopped. Maybe war exists because we never teach our children that the story continues after the last page. Today, during a break in drills, I watched a group of younger soldiers tossing a ball in the yard. Their laughter was quick, unguarded. For a moment, the yard was just a yard, not a place where boots learn to keep time with orders. And I thought, if war can vanish for a few minutes like that, then it's not as permanent as it pretends to be. Maybe it exists because we keep giving it permission to come back. After the game, I walked to the edge of the field. There's a tree there, bare now, its branches black against the winter sky. Last spring, it was covered in pale blossoms, each one fragile enough to disappear in the wind. I remember standing under it then, thinking that peace might be exactly like those petals, beautiful, temporary, but worth planting anyway. And perhaps war exists because not enough of us believe something that fragile can survive. This afternoon, a supply truck arrived. The driver, an older man with weathered hands, handed me a package wrapped in brown paper. "Okay, from home," he said. Inside was a small tin of honey from my mother's pantry, the label worn. "Okay." The smell was immediate and familiar, pulling me back to a kitchen table where the windows steamed in winter and my hands were always sticky from bread and honey. Sitting there, I understood something I hadn't before. Maybe war exists because we have been taught to value the sweetness of quinoa more than the sweetness of simple bread. As night settled, I wrote another line in my notebook. War exists because we speak of peace like it is a reward, not a responsibility. I underlined it twice. Then I closed the notebook, not wanting the ink to catch too much light. The barracks are quiet now, save for the occasional cough, the creak of wood shifting in the cold. I lie back, my head sinking into the thin pillow, and imagine speaking to that younger version of myself, the one who believed dragons were the enemy. I'd tell him the truth. The real dragons don't breathe fire, they breathe fear. And they grow every time you forget to see the person inside the armor. If he asked me why there is war, I'd give him the gentlest answer I could, because we are still learning to tell stories where no one has to be the villain. And maybe, if I'm lucky, he'd believe me enough to keep dreaming of a world where that's true. The wind is restless tonight. It presses against the walls of the barracks in slow, steady breaths, like an animal circling before lying down. I can feel its rhythm through the wooden boards, as if the whole building were breathing with me. The lamp on the crate beside my bed flickers now and then, its light catching on the edge of my tin cup, turning water into gold for a heartbeat, before letting it fade. I've been speaking silently to the boy I used to be all evening. He sits at the foot of my bed in my mind, legs swinging, hands folded in his lap. He's patient, too patient for a child his age, but maybe that's because he knows I have trouble finding the right words. "Why is there war?" he asks, and his voice is not accusing. It's curious, like he's asking why snow melts or why leaves turn red in autumn. I tell him, sometimes it's because people think there's only one way to be safe, and they forget that safety can be shared. He frowns, like he's tasting the sentence for bitterness. I don't blame him. Safety has never tasted simple to me either. Today, I walked past the storage shed behind the mess hall and saw footprints in the snow, small ones, heading toward the fence. They stopped abruptly, the last print steeper, as if the person had stood there a while. I followed them with my eyes to the other side, where the snow lay untouched. No crossing, no return. I wondered what they had been looking for. Maybe someone on the other side of the fence. Okay. Maybe just a piece of sky that wasn't blocked by wires. Okay. And I thought, maybe war exists because we've built more fences than doors. Later, during chores, I sat on a wooden crate, peeling potatoes with Rojas. He worked quickly, the skins curling in long ribbons. "You know why this happens?" he asked, holding up a potato with a soft brown spot. "Rot starts in the quiet places. You don't notice until it shows on the outside." I nodded. He meant the potato, but I thought of people, how fear and anger grow in the silent corners we don't dare look at. Perhaps war exists because we keep ignoring the quiet places until the rot spreads. This afternoon, the snow stopped and the sky opened into a pale blue that looked too delicate to hold. I walked to the edge of camp, where the meadow begins, and just stood there. The ground glittered with frost, each crystal catching the sun like it had been saving the light for weeks. For a moment, I felt what I can only call relief, that the earth can still look beautiful, even after everything we've done to it. Maybe war exists because we forget that beauty doesn't need to be claimed. Only noticed that as evening came, I found myself back in my bunk early. The others were still talking in the mess hall, their voices a warm hum through the walls. I took out my notebook and wrote, "War exists because we mistake being right for being whole." I stared at the words for a long time, unsure if they were entirely true, but certain they were close. Now the boy at the foot of my bed asks me another question. Can it stop? And this time I answer without hesitation. Yes, but not all at once. The world doesn't quit its habits in a day. Stops the way snow stops flake by flake, until one morning you look out the window and see grass again. He smiles, and before he fades back into wherever my mind keeps him, he says, "Then keep watch. Hey," and I will dot this morning. The frost on the window looked like a forest. Tiny branches, perfect and brittle, stretching across the glass as if the night had been drawing while we slept. I traced one with my finger, following its twists until it disappeared into the fog of my breath. For a moment, the cold didn't feel like an enemy, felt like an artist that had been patient all night, waiting for me to notice. Maybe that's how peace works, too, quietly building itself in the corners until someone stops long enough to see it. During roll call, a stray dog trotted through camp. Then, with patches of fur missing, but his tail wagged with the kind of trust that makes you ache. He went from one soldier to another, accepting crumbs, a scratch behind the ear. No one chased him away. For a few minutes, we were just people standing in the cold, watching a creature remind us that kindness doesn't need permission. And I thought maybe war exists because we wait for orders to be kind. After breakfast, I was sent to help unload crates from the supply truck. Inside one of them, beneath tins of beans and sacks of flour, there was a bundle wrapped in cloth. I unwrapped it carefully, and there they were, a dozen wool scarves, hand-knitted, each one a different color. No note, no name, just warmth folded, neatly, waiting to be worn. I kept one, deep blue, and passed the others around, watching the men pull them over their heads, seeing the way their shoulders loosened. I realized something simple. Maybe war exists because we forget how much dignity lives in comfort. By afternoon, the snow had melted in patches, revealing the muddy ground beneath. In one of those patches, near the mess hall, a single green shoot was pushing through. It wasn't much then, trembling in the wind, but it was alive. I crouched down to look closer, half expecting it to be a trick of the light. But no, it was real. And in that fragile stem, I saw the truth. The earth doesn't ask for permission to heal. It just does. Maybe war exists because people, unlike the earth, wait for the right conditions to begin again. Tonight, in my bunk, I'm writing by the dimmest light I can manage. The others are sleeping, their breathing steady, and I don't want to wake them. My pen scratches softly, like it's walking across fresh snow. Alright, war exists because we think it's the only language everyone understands. And then I cross it out not because it isn't true, but because I want to believe it can be forgotten. Before I put the notebook away, I think about the boy who sometimes visits the foot of my bed in my mind. I imagine telling him about the frost forest, the stray dog, the wool scarves, the green shoot. I'd tell him, today the war stepped aside for a while and I saw what was waiting behind it. And maybe that's how it begins to end, not with treaties or speeches, but with small, stubborn pieces of peace slipping in through the cracks. The frost didn't come back this morning. Instead, a thin mist hung low over the camp, softening the lines of every tent, every post, every face. It was the kind of light that doesn't cast shadows, as if the day itself didn't want to choose sides. I stood in it longer than I should have, feeling the damp settle on my coat, breathing in air that smelled faintly of pine smoke from the kitchen stove. During drills, the ground was wet enough that our boots sank slightly with each step. There was something grounding about it, literally pulling us closer to the earth. For once, I didn't feel like I was marching against something, but with it. And that made me think, maybe war exists because we've forgotten how to walk with the ground beneath us, not just over it. At midday, I was sent to deliver a message to the far side of camp. On the way back, I passed by the same crooked fence post I'd seen 100 times before. But today, someone had hung a tin can from it, tied with a piece of frayed rope. Inside the can was a handful of wildflowers, faded, frostbitten, but still upright. No one claimed them. No one explained them. They were just there, holding their own small ceremony in the cold. Maybe war exists because we don't leave enough flowers where they're not expected. Later, I stopped by the mess hall for coffee. It was weak and bitter, but it was warm. At the next table, two soldiers I'd never heard speak to each other before were laughing real laughter. The kind that tilts your head back. I don't know what the joke was, but I didn't need to. The sound was enough. It rolled across the room like a tide, pulling everyone's shoulders down from around their ears. And I thought, maybe war exists because we let too many days pass without that kind of laughter. This evening, just before sunset, a letter arrived from one of the men in my barracks. He opened it slowly, unfolding the paper with hands that shook not from cold, but from something heavier. After reading, he passed it to me without a word. It was from his mother. No news, no instructions, just a single sentence. I'm keeping your place at the table. I handed it back to him, and for the rest of the night, kept thinking, maybe war exists because too many people don't know they have a place being kept for them now. As I lie here, the mist has returned, slipping against the window pane like a tired visitor. The lamp is almost out, its flame small but steady. I write one more line in my notebook before I sleep. War exists because we forget that peace is not an event, it's a practice. I close the notebook, tuck it under my pillow, and listen to the breathing around me. Somewhere, deep in the quiet, I hear the faint clink of that tin can on the fence, swaying gently in the night. And I think maybe tomorrow I'll bring it more flowers. The mist hasn't lifted all day. It stayed low, curling around the barracks and the trees, blurring the distance so that the world felt smaller, more contained. It reminded me of mornings at home when my mother would boil water for tea and the steam would drift around her face, softening the lines the years had given her. I stood outside in it for a while before breakfast, letting the damp cling to my hair and coat, feeling as if the air itself was holding me still. During the morning chores, I was sent to fetch water from the pump. The handle was cold, stiff from the night, and I had to lean my weight into it. As the first stream poured into the bucket, I noticed the sound it made, steady, rhythmic, almost like the breathing of someone sleeping deeply. It struck me then, peace might not be the absence of noise, but the presence of a sound that doesn't demand your attention, it only keeps you company. Later, in the yard, I passed 2 soldiers repairing a torn section of netting. They worked without speaking, passing the needle back and forth in a quiet rhythm. Every so often, one would pull the thread taut, and the net would close just a little more. I kept thinking how mending looks a lot like prevention. And maybe war exists because we've forgotten how much of living is just mending what we can before it breaks completely. After lunch, I walked past the crooked fence post again. The tin can was still there, still holding its small bouquet. But now, someone had added a ribbon red, frayed at the edges, tied in a careful knot. It made the flowers look less lonely, as if they'd been given company. I didn't see who had done it, but it didn't matter. Acts like that don't need an author. Maybe war exists because we want credit for kindness, when the best kind is anonymous. In the late afternoon, the mess hall smelled of bread, fresh, warm, the kind that makes you pause before you even realize it. I sat with my coffee and watched one of the cooks slip a small loaf into a cloth, tie it closed, and set it aside near the door. Later, I saw the stray dog from yesterday, curled up beside that same cloth, paws tucked under, tail resting over its nose. Bread, warmth, and sleep all without a single command. Maybe war exists because we've made compassion too complicated down. In my bunk, I think about how much has changed in such small increments. A ribbon on a fence, a loaf left for a dog, 2 men mending without speaking. None of these will make it into any report. None will change the borders on a map, but they have changed the borders inside me. And perhaps that's the quiet answer I've been looking for. War exists because the borders inside us are left undefended by kindness for too long. I write it down. I underline it. And as I set my pen aside, the mist outside thickens, wrapping the barracks in a softness that feels almost deliberate. For the first time in months, I think I might actually sleep without dreams. This morning, I woke before the bugle. The camp was still, wrapped in that thin, silvery light that comes just before the sun makes any promises. The mist had retreated, but the ground still held its cool memory. I sat on the edge of my bunk, feeling the boards beneath my feet, thinking about how much of this place I'll carry with me when I leave on, how much of it I'll choose not to. While fetching water, I passed the crooked fence again. The tin can of flowers was still there, now dusted lightly with frost. The red ribbon had frozen into a stiff arc, holding its curve against the cold. It felt like a lesson how even something delicate can hold its shape if it knows its purpose. Maybe war exists because too many of us live without deciding what shape we want to keep. After breakfast, I walked the perimeter with Rojas. We didn't speak much, just our boots crunching over patches of ice, the occasional call of a crow. At one point, he stopped, pointed to the horizon, and said, "Looks like snow." I followed his gaze, but I saw something else. First, a flock of birds, moving in a loose, unhurried pattern. They weren't migrating, they were just together. No formation, no leader barking orders, just a shared sky. I thought, maybe war exists because we've convinced ourselves that every gathering needs a leader. By midday, the sky had darkened. The first flakes began to fall as I helped carry firewood to the mess hall. The snow made no sound as it landed, but it changed everything: the way the light moved, the way the air tasted. In that quiet, I remembered my grandmother saying, "Snow forgives the ground." I think now she meant more than weather. Later, while sweeping near the barracks door, I found a button, plain, wooden, worn, smooth. Didn't belong to me, and I didn't know whose it was. Still, I slipped it into my pocket. There was something comforting about holding it, like proof that even the smallest piece of something can be worth keeping. Maybe war exists because we've been taught to measure value in size instead of care. Tonight, in my bunk, I take out the button and place it on my notebook. The two things look unrelated, a scrap from someone's coat and a collection of my restless thoughts. Dang, but in some strange way, they belong together. The button holds a place in fabric. My words hold a place in time. And maybe that's how the war ends for me, not when the noise stops, but when I start keeping track of the things that hold something together instead of tearing it apart. Okay? War exists because we've forgotten how to be keepers instead of takers. Then I close the notebook, place the button on top, and let the lamp go dark. Outside, the snow keeps falling, soft as forgiveness. The night has a texture of wool and old paper, soft and a little rough, the kind that remembers the palms that handled it. I lie awake a while with the lamp turned low, the halo of light no larger than a dinner plate on the ceiling. The boards under my cot answer every small shift with a sigh. Hey, and beyond the window, the world is a charcoal sketch shapes without edges. A fence that might be fog, a tree that might be a thought. I haven't finished thinking. My watch ticks on the crate. I keep listening for the moment a tick won't follow the last, as if time itself might get tired of marching and decide to sit down beside me. Doesn't. The little hand goes on being brave, not with noise, but with stubbornness. Perhaps that is a kind of answer in a place that loves the drum and the bugle. Peace is the courage to be small and steady. Rojas had said something like that earlier, while we were sorting firewood behind a mess. The trick with wet logs, he told me, touching a knuckle to his temple, is to start with the little pieces that catch. Always the little ones first. They teach the big ones that fire is possible. Okay? He smiled, half mischief and half prayer. Sometimes I think Rojas and the watch are in league, whispering the same lesson through different mouths. I turn the lamp down a notch and the room gets gentler. The smell of the day still lingers, a trace of soap that never fully rinses from sleeves, a metal temps that clings to shovels and spoons, a sweetness from the loaf the cook slipped into a cloth for the stray dog. Somewhere in the far end of the barracks, a man talks in his sleep, a string of soft words like beads he's counting back to himself. I won't remember them in the morning, but they steady me now. Today began with the pump and the bucket, as it often does, water speaking in that tireless voice, the handle cold enough to make my fingers smart. The mist hovered low until mid-morning, and the frost forest on the window remade itself in new branches, as if the night had been practicing again. I traced one ferned artery with my fingernail, and it melted under the heat of me, bead by bead. It felt like a small betrayal and a small blessing. Beautiful things keep choosing to vanish when you notice them. And noticing is still the only honest way to say thank you. On my way back from the pump, I passed the crooked fence post. Someone, no one would say, who had given the tin can another offering. A sprig of green that must have been coaxed from under the snow with care, wrapped at the base with a twist of string. The red ribbon still held its curve, stiff with frozen memory, and beside it, the flowers now browned and brittle, standing watch like honored elders. The can clinked in the faint breeze, a bell for prayers that do not know their own words. I stood there a moment with my hands in my pockets and thought, if a line of a hymn can live in a can on a fence, maybe a treaty can live in a pocket until it is needed. Maybe paper needn't be stamped with seals to keep a promise. Maybe it only needs to be warmed by a hand at breakfast. The cook with the kind eyes slid a mug toward me and poured the coffee before I asked. "You walked early," he said, like a weather report. I nodded and told him about the ribbon, the sprig of green. He shrugged as if to say, goodness is obvious when you are awake at the right hour. I wanted to tell him that his bread made this room into a room again, not just a place under a roof. I wanted to tell him the dog had learned to schedule a mercy. I just said, thank you. And we let the steam write the rest of the sentence on the air. After breakfast, we mended the net again. the one that keeps stray leaves from clogging the runoff ditch behind the latrines. The dull needle moved between our hands with a rhythm as gentle as the pump's voice. Pull and pass, pull and pass. A tiny stitch closing what had been torn. Every time the net tightened, I felt a little loosening in my chest. I thought, not for the first time, war is a school that insists you learn to break before it teaches you to mend. And then I corrected myself. Maybe it never teaches you to mend at all. Maybe you have to learn that lesson from the ditch and the needle, and the quiet man beside you who says nothing but keeps the thread unknotted. The chaplain stopped by during the noon hour with a pocket full of folded paper psalms for those who wanted psalms, news clippings for those who wanted to worry about something they could name. He sat on the step and asked me, not with the weight of a priest, but with the curiosity of a child at a window, "What did the bed say last night?" I told him I was getting close to an answer. I didn't want to simplify. He nodded, as if answers are like soup. You can ruin them by boiling too fast. He left a clipping in my hand about a town I know only by the way the syllables rolled toward a river. There had been a ceasefire there for a day. A day can be a cathedral if you know how to stand inside it. In the afternoon, a pale sun took courage and pushed through the mist. We were sent to stack the new delivery of coal beside the shed. Coal is unfriendly to fingers and kind to a stove. It is a friend who tells you the truth with a rough voice. Rojas managed to get a smear across his cheek and declined to wipe it away. "This makes me look industrious," he said, and I told him he didn't need help in that department. We laughed, without needing it to be funny. Sometimes you can tie two people together for an hour with nothing but a shared grin. On my break, I opened my notebook to the page where I'd written, "Days ago, war exists because we mistake being right for being whole." The words had dried into themselves, but they looked restless, as if they wanted to move into a different house. I wrote beneath them, carefully, "Wholeness isn't a vote you win. It's a room you keep returning to until it recognizes you." I let the pen rest and thought of the hallway and the room, the boots and the bed. I thought again of my mother's tablecloths, layered not to hide stains, but to keep them from deepening. We tell the same story with the net and the ditch. We tell it with scarves, in a crate, in a loaf, in a cloth. We tell it with a dog taught by kindness to expect tomorrow. I remembered the book of pressed leaves. I hadn't taken it out for a week, afraid that too much light would ask it to give more than it had left. Tonight, I slid it from under the thin pillow and opened to the oak that had kept its green longer than the others. In the lamp's quiet circle, the veins rose like a map of footpaths through a town that knew how to love its own. I held it up to the glass, and the frost forest turned semi-transparent where the leaf hovered. And for a breath, the inside and outside mapped onto each other. A tree drawn on a wall in a ruined house. A leaf held against the night. A man in a bed promising a boy that dragons are made of fear and can be named. There's a trick I learned as a child when I was too afraid to sleep. I would list the sounds the dark made until the dark was just a choir of familiar instruments. Tonight, I tried again. The watch ticking, a hinge learning its age, breath of the man above me, a fraction slower than mine, the tiny clink of the can on the fence when the wind remembers itself, a mouse like a pencil moving along a margin, the far-off shuffle of boots to pairs, unhurried, a patrol that trusts the path, a pike contracting as it forgets the day's heat, a blanket being pulled over an unseen shoulder. When I get to 10 sounds, I always stop and say, "You see?" to no one in particular, and then I am less alone. But I have not told you yet about the boy, the one who sits at the foot of my bed in my mind. He came earlier than usual this evening and asked for a story, not about dragons and knights, but about a river. "Tell me the one about the stone," he said, as if there were only one stone in the world. So I told him, when I was small, my father and I would walk to the river at dusk with pockets full of flat stones. He'd skim them and count, and I'd clap whether the number was 3 or 13. The trick, he whispered, though I knew he was teaching me more than physics, is to listen to the stone. Okay? It tells you the angle it prefers. Okay? He would tilt the little disc in his fingers until it felt as if it were already riding the air, and then send it out over the water. I tried, clumsy at first, my stones ending with plunks and rings that sank. One evening, frustrated, I threw one straight up. Okay? It seemed, in that childish way, like a protest against gravity's arrogance. The stone arced, spun, and came down a few paces away, landing in the grass with a small, precise thud. When I picked it up, it was warm from its journey. You found it, my father said, and I didn't know what he meant until he touched the edge of the stone to my forehead and said, the angle you prefer. Tonight, in the barracks, I took the wooden button from my pocket, the one I found by the door days ago, and rubbed it between my fingers like a worry stone. No edges to teach me anything. It's just a circle that insisted on being itself. It is useless for fastening without its thread and its coat to belong to. Still, it asks to be kept. Perhaps that is why the heart is round, so it can be turned and still fit any hand that means it no harm. Around supper, I walked past the mess to breathe the cold a little, and the stray dog trotted up with the confidence of someone invited. He sat as if we had arranged a meeting and blinked at me with the patience of a tutor who knows you are close to grasping the lesson. I scratched the place behind his ear where trust lives, and he leaned into it like a door opening. You have made us better, I told him, and he wagged once as though the compliment were deserved but not necessary. The cook came out and set the cloth-wrapped loaf near the step. The dog looked at both of us, solemn as a clerk, then carried the bread away at a pace that said he knew the route, the safe corner, the bed of leaves that would be warmer for having company after dark. Because the cold demanded it, we sat by the stove for a while. Men tell fewer jokes when fire is doing. It's slow arithmetic. The chaplain said nothing. Rojas hummed. A young recruit ran a thumb over the seam of his mug until the seam was a relationship. I asked him, what is the smallest thing that saved you today? The recruit said, the mug being warm before the coffee went in. Rojas said, the splinter that didn't go under my nail. The chaplain said, a crow landing on the crossbeam like it owned the place. Okay? I said, the ribbon holding its shape. No one asked me to explain. It is nice, sometimes, to be known simply by the kind of details you choose. When the stove had eaten its fill, and we had said the sorts of good nights men permit themselves, I came back to the cot and sat with my notebook. Ty wrote, war exists, because we keep rehearsing the hero's entrance and forgetting to cast anyone as the neighbor. Okay? I let the sentence sit there and felt how it wanted to bloom into 10 more, and I told it to breathe instead. There is a difference between flowering and overcrowding the pot. I remember the old colonel once telling me, in a rare hour when rank turned its head and pretended not to watch, that every conflict is part ledger, part lullaby. You have to know what's owed. Yes, he said, but you also have to know how to sing someone to sleep who doesn't remember what calm feels like. We are not taught lullabies here. The ones we hum, we bring from kitchens and porches, from grandmothers, and radios in a seat beside a window on a bus going somewhere worth the knitting in your hands. I decided tonight to teach myself one. I made it out of what the day had given me. A pump that breathes, a watch that tells the truth softly, a can that rings only when the world wants to be a bell, a leaf that refuses surrender, a button that belongs because it asks to, a net that closes slowly and keeps the ditch from swallowing what it shouldn't, a ribbon that holds its curve for the sake of dignity, a loaf set down like a vow, a scarf pulled over a neck with hands that don't need a name, a dog that believes us. I hummed this to the boards and to the blanket, Cain to the boy at the foot of the bed, until the tune became less a tune than a way of breathing. Somewhere in the middle of it, the answer came not as a sentence, but as a place. Kitchen with a foggy window and a table that knows every elbow and every grief and doesn't mind either. In that place, you can say war without summoning it. You can say home without breaking. The kettle is on the stove, but the lid is a little loose on purpose. The steam finds the glass and draws maps with its finger. And the lines are not borders, but roots for friends. If you want a sentence anyway, and we always do, we storytellers, and Ledger Men here is mine tonight, honest as I can make it. There is war, because we keep postponing tenderness, and tenderness, postponed, grows teeth. I will wake tomorrow, and it will be ordinary. The pump, the roll call, the sound of a distant engine that has learned the road by heart. The mending, the coal, the quiet. Someone will ask, out loud or with his eyes, why the world keeps choosing the hallway over the room. I will answer with the list I hummed and with the scarf around my neck, and with my hand on the dog's head and with the cup warm before the coffee goes in. We think answers are words. Maybe they are rooms you invite people into and then make tea. But before I sleep, tonight wants one more story, and the boy nods as if he knew which one I would tell. It is about the apple trees. We planted 3 near the fence when I was small. My father and I, the soil there was rocky and salt. The fence threw shade it hadn't paid for. We dug anyway, loosening earth like an apology, and pressed the seeds down with the pads of our thumbs. My father told me to cover them, not tightly, but kindly. Ear is part of the recipe, he said, and I have tried to remember that with my heart as much as with my hands. The first year, there was nothing. Then, the gall of a single leaf. Then, a stem with the stubbornness of a shy child refusing the stage. The year before the sirens, the middle tree gave us 3 apples. Small and green, with a blush at the cheek, like someone had told them a good secret. We cut them into careful 8s and salted them the way my grandmother had taught my mother to do. Bitterness is just the tongue remembering when to be careful. She'd sat at a sink I can still hear. We ate standing up, juice on our knuckles, and my father wiped his hands on his pants in a way I promised myself I would emulate when I became the kind of man who could own an afternoon. I have never asked the moon to carry a message, but tonight I do. To the trees, you were not my first lesson, but you were my kindest. You taught me that a harvest is a relationship, not a right, that hammers are not hands, that fence shade is only a problem if you let it be a border instead of a pattern. 2. The boy, you can go to sleep now. There will be apples again, and if there aren't, there will be something else that remembers sweetness for you. To the war, you are loud, but you aren't fluent. We have other languages. We do. We have the language of I kept your place at the table, which arrived for a man last night in a hand that had baked bread and paid bills and folded shirts and still found room to keep a seat open in a room the world swears is too small for waiting. We have the language of 2 men mending a net until a ditch remembers how to be a ditch and not a mouth. We have the ribbon and the tin can and the patience of a fence post that leans and still intends to be a fence, only in the way. A line in a poem intends to hold a thought together. Outside, the sky has cleared and the stars have chosen to show their work. I tilt my head and let the lamp's circle sit on my chest like a quiet medal I did not win, only wore on behalf of a day well spent. The man above me rolls over, the blanket hisses. Somewhere far off a crow, night blind and confident, announces itself to no one it needs to impress. The stove in the mess exhales, the last coal releasing its story. The watch ticks and does not apologize for not being a drum. I think of the colonel's ledger, and for once I do the math my way. What was owed today? Listed without writing. A thank you to the pump, a nod to the ribbon, a hand to the dog, a glance to the frost forest, a coin to the man who laces his boots slowly to spare his back, a song to the chaplain who asked the right question, an hour to the ditch that needed mending, a minute to my own breath, a second to every second. And what was paid? Enough, I decide. Enough for the day to go to sleep without interest accruing in the wrong ledger. Why is there war? The boy asks again, but his voice is already cotton, already the weight that pulls lids down, 'cause we are late to our gentleness. I answer, and he nods in the exact rhythm of the watch. Tomorrow I will go to the crooked fence with a small gift for the can. Not flowers. I think they have done their watch well. I will bring instead a short pencil with teeth marks and leave it in the can with a ribbon and the browning bouquet. A pencil says, there are lines we can draw that are not borders. It says, we can write the next part ourselves if we don't like the script. It says, paper in the pocket is a place. You can live there a while when the hallway forgets where it was supposed to lead, away. If the wind plays the can's thin lip like an instrument, the pencil will be a baton. If no one notices, the pencil will not mind. Not being noticed is one of the pencil's gifts. And now the lamp must go out, or it will keep being brave on my behalf and grow tired before morning. I turn the knob, and the darkness arrives like someone who knows the house well and doesn't need to shout to find the chair. The bed lifts me just enough that I feel held and not pinned. I slide the notebook under the pillow again, the button on top of it, a small moon for dreams to navigate by. If I wake in the dark, I will list the sounds until the dark becomes a choir. If I dream, I will walk to the river and skip the stone at the angle it prefers and count softly as it touches and touches and touches again. If I cannot sleep, I will teach myself the lullaby of the pump and the watch and the ribbon and the loaf and the scarf and the dog until the lullaby has learned me. Before my eyes close, I do a last small thing, because I am learning that last small things are a way to keep tomorrow honest. I put my hand out from beneath the blanket and let my palm find the air. It is cool and it presses back, and in that press, I feel the door becoming a threshold. It's the hallway, remembering the room at its end. The world loud in districts, I cannot repair leaning its ear toward this small corner and agreeing, just for a few hours, to whisper, if you still want the answer in a line you can carry in a pocket like a leaf that refuses to surrender its green. There is war because we forget to keep each other's places in the rooms that teach us our names, and there will be less war when more of us remember the practice, the room, the table, the warm mug before coffee, the first stitch of a net, the little logs that teach the big ones how to burn without burning the house. The watch ticks. The bed agrees. The night sits down beside me and, for once, does not ask anything except that I rest. I wake to the gray that comes before any trumpet. The hour when light is only a rumor passed from window to window. The room is colder than last night. The blanket has collected a shore of chill along its edge. For a long moment, I do nothing but listen. The building answers in its small languages, the tick of my watch on the crate, the gentle whitening of the window as day thinks about happening, the deep, even breathing of the man in the bunk above mine. The watch is faithful, stubborn as ever, counting out the space in which a thought can grow. I remember the promise I made to myself in the dark, the pencil. I sit up slowly so the boards won't complain and reach under the pillow for the notebook and the wooden button. The button. It's cool. The notebook patient. In the pocket of my coat, exactly where I left it. The little pencil waits with teeth marks that are not mine. Someone else needed to think with their mouth once. I turned the pencil in my fingers until it feels like an idea with weight. And then I dress in the cleanest shirt I have, the one that still remembers the smell of soap instead of smoke. Outside, the air tastes like metal and mint. Frost has silvered the grass so that every blade looks briefly honest about how fragile it is. My breath writes a short letter, and the wind reads it and doesn't answer. The crooked fence post stands where it always stands, sincere in its leaning. The tin can hangs from its frayed rope like a bell in a chapel that belongs only to mornings. The red ribbon holds its shaped bow, a thin arc of ceremony against the cold. The flowers are browner, more brittle. It's a sprig of green that someone tucked there yesterday has stiffened into a tiny soldier that refuses to salute winter. I place the pencil in the can, not upright like a flag, not hidden like a contraband, just nested among stems and ribbon. The way a thought finds a home among other thoughts in a mind that isn't policing the border. The can answers with a soft clink. A breeze considers the scene and decides to be a hand for a second, setting everything gently in motion. Ribbon, sprig, pencil. The little rim of the can making a sound I have decided means keep going. For a breath. The whole arrangement looks like a mobile someone would hang above a child's bed to teach them that the world moves without malice. Good morning, I say, to no one and to everything. Back in the barracks, the day remembers itself. Boots locate feet, belts remember their holes. The young recruit with the careful hands combs his hair by feel. Rojas lifts his chin at me in greeting and notices the stubby absence where the pencil used to live in my pocket. You put it where? It belongs, he asks. Yes, I say, and he doesn't ask where that is. We have been learning to trust each other's altars. Breakfast is bread that believes in itself, and coffee that at least believes in heat. The cook slides a mug toward me before I ask, as though he has learned my story by the way I walk. His sleeves are dusted with flour. He carries dignity the way some men carry weapons with practice and without showing off. On the counter by the stove, a cloth-wrapped loaf sits in the place I now think of as a promise waiting to be kept. The dog hasn't come yet, but the bread doesn't worry about timing. You were up early, the cook says. Same as yesterday, but I tell him the new part. A pencil, I say, for the can. He smiles at the idea like it's a note in a song he used to know. Good, he says. We'll need it. What for? Asks a voice down the line. For correcting ourselves, he answers. And I keep the taste of that sentence with my coffee after breakfast. The pump handle remembers my hands, and I remember its stubborn hinge. The water comes in its own steady voice, rhythm that asks for nothing back. While I fill the bucket, a crow lands on the fence and tilts its head to look at me with one bright coin of an eye. Crows know how to make tools from what the world throws. OE wire stick, the lines people drop when they think they're finished talking. I wonder what a crow would do with the pencil. Probably something useful. I carry the bucket past the can and look without stopping. The pencil has settled into its new life, as if it had always belonged to ribbon and stem. Tiny sun cuts through cloud and shows the can how to be a mirror. For a second, the rim shines like a ring that keeps its vows. On the drill field, the ground is soft from yesterday's thaw, so our boots sink just enough to tell us we're still in a place where weight makes a mark. The sergeant gives orders that the wind edits down to their kindest versions. We step, we stop, we step at the far edge of the yard. The bare tree that I've been watching for months stands with its black fingers spread, all quiet insistence and no apology. Last spring, the blossoms were so many you couldn't count them. Now the branches hold their emptiness, lean and honest. I look at it and think, growth looks like noise until it's done. Rest looks like absence until you've learned to listen. Mid-morning brings a chore I've come to love, mending the net over the ditch behind the latrines. We crouch Rojas, the young recruit, and I and pass the dull needle from hand to hand. The net has new tears along the bottom where ice grabbed and then let go. The recruit's fingers are quick. The thread likes him because he treats it like a conversation instead of a leash. Rojas hums a tune that isn't quite a tune, but keeps our hands believing in the next stitch. We say little else. Some work is a way of speaking that doesn't require words to do their tricks. Do you think it matters? The recruit asks after a while, not looking up. It matters to the ditch, I say, and to whatever would have fallen in. And to us, Rojas adds, with the authority of someone who trusts simple sentences. We finish the mending, sit back on our heels to admire what isn't visible anymore. That's the trouble with repair. Its success looks like nothing. The world is most grateful for the labor it doesn't notice. I let that fact settle and try not to resent it. The ditch will carry what it should and refuse what it must, and I will walk past later and feel a small, unearned pride, then remind myself it was earned. The chaplain visits afternoon with his coat buttoned wrong at the collar. It's too much in a hurry to talk to mirrors. He holds out a folded paper and says, "A day's piece of river turned into two." He doesn't say which river. He doesn't say which map will green for 48 hours. He says, two, as if that number had been invented just for the occasion. Cathedral, I say, picking up our old metaphor. And he smiles the smile a man saves for when someone remembers the private road back to his favorite thought. What did the bed say? Case, because he has decided my bed is wiser than I am. It said, the pencil belongs with the ribbon, I answer. It said, the practice is to correct without scolding. He nods deeply, as if the idea had already been waiting behind his eyes. Then we are nearer, he says, not specifying nearer to what. He leaves me the folded paper and goes to injure his buttons elsewhere in the camp, and I unfold the news and lay it flat like bread dough. 2 days, I put the paper in my pocket with the button and feel briefly as if I am carrying a delicate machine that runs on believing. On my way to the shed for coal, I pass the crooked post again. The can has acquired one more treasure, a twig shaped like a question mark. It's not a trick, the wood has grown that way, a curl at the end that is either curiosity or prayer, a terror. Do not try to untwist it. I add nothing, only stand there a second longer than a man with chores would strictly allow himself, and let the sight find a place in me. When I walk on, my steps are quieter. Questions deserve quiet. The dog arrives by mid-afternoon, punctual, in spirit, if not in the clock's precise arithmetic. Hay sits in the doorway of the mess and looks at the wrapped loaf without touching it. Then at us, as if to remind us that patience is another kind of full bowl. The cook chuckles and pushes the bundle closer with the side of his boot. The dog takes it delicately and pads off toward his corner of leaves under the stacked pallets, tail low in concentration. I left him a little from making a ceremony of everything. We should all practice taking what is given, as if someone put their best hour into giving it. Because the day is dry and the wind indifferent, I take my laundry to the line behind the barracks. The shirts are tired the way metal gets tired, pool light to the eye and weary in their fibers. I pin them anyway, one by one, and let the air do what it knows. On the far end of the line, someone has left a scarf, deep blue like the sea imagined by a child who has only ever seen lakes. The yarn has remembers a pair of hands. Ted, check the clothespins, and for an instant hold it against my throat. Warmth walks right through me and sits down in my chest, says nothing, and will not be moved. I put the scarf back and turn away as if I had looked someone too long in the eyes. When the sun finally admits it is afternoon, the edge of chill softens. Men play cards at a crate balanced on 2 pails. Someone peels potatoes in long, satisfying curls that land in a bucket like paper shavings from a busy mind. I sit on the step and take out the wooden button, rub it between thumb and forefinger, the way some men worry a coin. I imagine the coat it once belonged to in the hand that fastened it in a hurry or in calm. And for a while, I let the whole life of that stranger pass across my lap like a slow river. The button warms. It knows how to belong, even without context. Rojas sits down beside me with 2 tin cups of something that pretends to be tea. He gives me the better of the two for reasons he'll never explain, and we watch the small world do its weather. After some quiet, he says, "I had a dream I was back home, but the streets were too wide, kept looking for a wall to lean on." He laughs once at the silliness of it, then doesn't laugh again. Maybe I just miss having angles that know my name. "We're learning new ones," I tell him, thinking of the stone in the river and my father's voice explaining the angles stones prefer. He says, which in his language means both agreement and the desire not to press comfort too hard. As light lowers, the cook opens the stove door and feeds the fire with the kindness of a host who knows his guests will not say when they have had enough. Heat moves across the room with open hands. There is a pot on the back burner, doing the slow math of beans. There is the golden brown sound of bread, remembering it is bread. Someone starts to hum the tune Rojas never quite remembers. And together they make a melody that almost steps into being before shrugging and deciding to be a mood instead. The chaplain returns in the dusk and sits by the stove with his hands like birds cupped in a hat. "Tell me," he says to the room, "the smallest thing that saved you today." It is our new game. It started last night and wants to be a tradition. "The pencil and the can," I say. "The dog waiting before taking the bread," says the cook. "It's the thread, not nodding," the recruit says softly. "The crow that landed like it had a key," offers Rojas, "the scarf on the line, staying where I left it." I add, surprised, "The sentence wants to be said." "The sun," says the chaplain, and then laughs at himself with a generosity that lets us all laugh too. "Forgive a man his large smallness," he adds. After supper, when dishes sing their porcelain song in the tub and the stove is full of the kind of glow that takes its time, I walk out alone to the fence because I cannot help myself. The can is there, of course, as if it has always been there and always will be, in the way some objects decide to become more than themselves. Ribbon, stems, pencil, question mark, twig, and inventory of what matters because it is humble. I stand, hat in hand, in a way that surprises me and try to listen. What does the arrangement say tonight? Not in words, in balance, in the way nothing tries to be the main character, in the way the breeze speaks to all of it at once and no jealousy arises. A nation, I think, is this or it is trouble. On my way back, I stop at the bare tree and put my palm against the bark. The cold goes into me and the tree does not apologize. I close my eyes and remember spring as if it were a story told by a grandmother whose voice is silk over gravel blossoms. So many they look like soap suds at the edge of a tub. Bees with their work ethic that doesn't need a manager. The sound leaves make when they decide to be a crowd. "You will do it again," I tell the branches, and they do not promise, but I believe them anyway. Night collects itself without hurry. The sky is a dark coat with a lining of small, patient lights. I return to my bunk through a corridor that smells of wool and wood and a day that did not betray us. The man above me is already arranged for sleep. His slow exhale counts backward from a number I never hear. I turn up the wick a little and make the lamp a small moon, just enough to keep the shadows from mistaking me for furniture. The watch lays its time onto the room like a net we're all glad to be caught in. I take out the notebook and look at what I wrote last night. There is war because we forget to keep each other's places. I put my new sentence beneath it. There is less war when we correct without shaming and mend without announcing. The pencil I used in the can asked to be left there, so I write with a stub that has been my companion long enough to know my slant. The paper receives the words and does not roll its eyes. I close the book and put it under the pillow with a button on top. I like the weight of that combo. Head-on thought on circle geometry for sleeping. Before I blow out the lamp, the boy appears at the foot of my bed again, as he often does when a day has required me to pay attention to delicate things. He sits with his knees drawn up, chin resting where childhood likes to rest. "Did you skip the stone?" he asks, picking up the old lesson as if no days had passed between questions. "I put a pencil in a can," I say. He tilts his head, wondering how that could possibly be a story. "It's like skipping a stone," I explain. "The angle matters. The gentleness matters. You want it to touch as many surfaces as it can without sinking. You want it to teach the water how to be soft without being less water." He nods the nod people give when they understand by feel, even if the math hasn't shown its work. "What did the can say?" "Said, we can write when we are ready and erase when we are kinder," I tell him. "Said, paper in a pocket is a place to live for a minute when the hallway is loud." He yawns, a yawn that makes me want to protect the whole world from door slams. "Then we're closer," he says, borrowing the chaplain's word, and fades into the comfortable corners of myself. I blow out the lamp. Darkness arrives like an old friend who knows where the chair is and doesn't need the lights to find their way. The room expands. The sounds come forward. List them because it helps. The mouse in the margin, the pipe slowly forgetting heat, the watch persisting. The crone less, that's memory settling on wood somewhere, the quiet of the stove in, the mess like a sleeping animal, the wind running its fingers through the trees and finding the same knots as yesterday. I count to 10 and then let go of counting. Sleep takes me in increments like a careful porter shouldering a load in small lifts. In the spaces between lifts, a thought manages to put itself in order. It is not a grand definition or a sentence for a parade. It is a thing I can carry without dropping. War exists because we keep practicing division as if it were a virtue. Peace begins when we practice attention as if it were a skill. Tomorrow we'll ask for the usual taxes: the pump, the ditch, the coal, the roll call, the rope on the can that will one day decide to give way and then be replaced by hands that have learned to tie knots without tightening them into cruelty. We will eat bread and correct ourselves and mend what rips because cold isn't a strategist, it is only itself. The dog will arrive, the scarf will still warm a neck. The button will keep reminding my thumb that circles are in ethics. The tree will not pretend to be anything it is not. The crow will audit our untidiness and make a tool out of what we shed. And somewhere upriver or down, 2 days will stand, back to back, a small cathedral of ordinary that says, "See." It holds, maybe 3, maybe just 1 again. We will count them softly and call that counting hope. For now, the night sits with me the way a nurse sits with the end of a corridor, the whole building in their ear. It's the whole building in their pulse, the whole building rooted by someone who remembers that every door leads to a room where someone is trying to sleep. I turn my palm up outside the blanket, a small flag that does not need a country, and let the air press against it. The pressure is proof that I share a world with other breathings. That is enough to close my eyes. You need the pocket sentence to put beside the pencil and the button. There is war because we forget to treat each other like rooms we're keeping warm. There's less war when more of us learn to leave a loaf on a step, a ribbon on a can, a question mark twig where a fence has the sense to bow, and a pencil where anyone can reach it when the story we live needs a gentler correction. Morning arrives the way a kind hand sets a cup down quietly, near enough to warm you without startling. I wake to the gray. That means the sun is thinking about it. The window has traded its phosphorus for a thin veil of mist, and the glass smells faintly of metal when I touch it with my knuckle. The watch on the crate keeps the room honest. Its ticking is the single stitch I can hear in the larger cloth of the day. I dress with the same small ceremony I've learned to trust. Shirt that still remembers soap. Jacket with a threadbare elbow that insists on surviving. Laces pulled. Snug, not tight, because tight is a kind of fear, and snug is a kind of care. When I step outside, the crooked fence post greets me from its place the way elders greet from a porch. The tin can, ribbon stiff in the cool, holds the pencil where I left it, and the little question mark twig like a punctuation mark that refuses to be bossed into certainty. Overnight, someone has added a feather black with a blue glint when the light finds it, slicked by weather into a single line that says flight without bragging. I don't touch it. It belongs to all of us the way a hymn belongs to a room at the pump. The handle is less stubborn than yesterday. Water comes easy. The bucket receives. The ground darkens into a circle that looks briefly like a halo for dirt. A crow lands on the rail and watches me with the patient audit of a creature that knows how much we waste and how much we rescue by accident. You'd have stolen my pencil, I tell it, and the crow opens and closes its beak in a way that says it won't confess. Breakfast is bread with authority and coffee that remembers warmth better than flavor. The cook nods toward the doorway where a cloth-wrapped loaf already rests for the dog. It's late on purpose now, the cook says. He likes to see if we'll keep faith. I answer that faith is a rhythm before it is a feeling. He grunts, pleased to have his own idea handed back with a new coat on. We spend the first hours mending. The net over the ditch has fared well since yesterday. So we turn to another patient, a door that squeals each time someone passes, as if the very act of entering or leaving causes pain. Rojas produces a tin of oil like a magician with a dove and touches the hinges with the attention people save for faces. The squeal softens to a question, then to a sigh. There, he says. Now the room can keep its thoughts. I run my hand along the door's edge and think about how many wars could be shortened by the right hinge and the right hour. A letter arrives mid-morning, not for me, but for the young recruit with the careful hands. He opens it and swallows. Watch the swallow travel down his throat like a pebble-seeking riverbed. He passes me the paper with a look that asks me to be a room he can stand in for a minute. The letter is only 3 lines. I found your scarf in the drawer where you left it. It still smells like you. I am keeping your place at the table, but I moved your chair closer to the window. He folds the paper to exactly the crease it had, puts it in his pocket, and breathes like a man returning to his body. The smallest thing that saved me today, he says, unprompted. And I nod because I know the game and because he's already won it. At noon, the chaplain brings news like a bird. Brings twigs, small, necessary, cumulative. 3, he says, holding up fingers that have blessed and buttoned and made mistakes. 3 days of priver. The ceasefire extends. None of us asks for the map. Number this tender belongs first to the body. We let it settle under our tongues. The chaplain sits and, for once, says nothing more. He is learning to let the good silence do its work. After lunch, I take laundry to the line. It's a deep blue scarf that isn't mine, still waits for its owner. An obedient river of wool pinned at the banks. I touch it only with my eyes, which is a way of telling your hands to be humble. A breeze lifts the scarf and the shirts and the day's small discouragements. The sun arrives not as a victory, but as company. I stand there long enough for my shadow to forget which direction it prefers. Later, I am sent with Rojas to the far shed to inventory nails. Nails are the punctuation of wood. Without them, too many commas, not enough endings. We sort them into jars, scavenged from a time when apples came sugared and summer could be kept on a shelf. Each jar receives its tribe: the short, the stubborn, the kind that split wood if you rush them. Same with people, Rojas murmurs. Tai, pretend not to hear, because agreement sometimes needs to be quiet to be true. On the way back, we check the crooked post. The can's gallery has grown again. Someone has tucked a strip of tin cut to look like a thin crescent moon. It throws a pale smile across the pencil and the feather. I imagine the hand that cut it patient, careful not to slice a finger, believing that a little moon in daytime is not foolishness but rehearsal. The can clinks to say amen. The dog arrives mid-afternoon, his paws muddy and his eyes clear. He sits in the doorway, looks at the loaf, then at the cook as ritual demands. The cook nods. The dog takes the bread, pauses, and this is new backs. Up 2 steps and lowers the loaf as if inviting us to see it a moment before he goes. We look, bread, cloth, dog, step, cook, the elements of a sacrament, no one named. The dog lifts the loaf again and pads off to his corner. He trusts the pause. I say, key, and the cook wipes his hands on his apron like a man who has added something to a ledger he'll never show. By late afternoon, the sky puts on its best, thin blue. We are given a task that makes us smile like boys. Sand a bench that has been splintering men for months. We drag it into the light, brace its legs with stones, and put our shoulders into the work. The wood answers with the small snow of its own past. Long strokes teach the bench how to be gentle with skin again. When we finish, Rojas runs his palm along the seat and exhales the way a man does when he forgives. We carry the bench back inside. Like a recovered memory, 2 men sit and do not flinch. The room feels suddenly more like a room and less like a hallway where people are punished for pausing near dusk. The recruit asks if I will walk with him to the fence. He has never said please, and he doesn't now, but it is folded into his posture. The can, weight, feather, ribbon, pencil, twig, crescent, all of it, making a grammar kind enough for a child. What's the pencil for? He asks, though he knows corrections. I say, edits that don't wound, lines that can be softened later. He nods. I don't want to be wrong, he confesses, and the admission hangs in the cold like a lantern. Okay, then be willing to be corrected, I answer. That's the only kind of not wrong that lasts. He breathes out and almost smiles. Can clinks its blessing. Night unrolls itself like a dark ribbon no one needs to cut. The stove in the mess learns its evening mathematics, dividing heat by patience, multiplying a pot of beans into enough. The chaplain takes his place on the bench and asks our question, the one that is beginning to feel like a ladder you can keep in your pocket. The smallest thing that saved you today. His voices answer in a molasses of warmth. The door that stopped complaining, says Rojas. The letter that moved the chair, says the recruit. The feather in the can, the cook says, surprising himself with his own tenderness. The bench forgiving us. Say the moon someone made with tin, the chaplain adds. Okay. And we all look at him because we had not noticed the new moon until then. We eat without display. A man who once told jokes until laughter was a chore sits quietly, chewing with reverence. Okay. Another who used to drop his spoon on purpose for applause now holds it like an instrument. I think of how war trains us to perform and how peace trains us to attend. Attendance is a skill. We are learning it around a table that has forgiven a lot of elbows after dishes. I walk to the bare tree and stand close enough to smell the quiet. I press my palm to the bark, rough, cold, honest. You will leaf again, I say, embarrassing myself and not minding. Somewhere deeper in the dark, something with wings moves and then decides against flying. The air tastes of iron and bread. I roll the wooden button in my pocket until it warms and feel for a second like I have a small planet of belonging orbiting my hand. Back in the barracks, lamps make islands of light in a sea that has chosen not to drown us. The man above me is a slow tide of breath. I sit on the cot and lay out my little museum notebook button, scrap of paper with the number 3 written on it, as if 3 were a noun. I open to a blank page. Blank doesn't scare me the way it used to. Blank is a meadow after snow, the ground, ready for our steps, if we remember where the fences are supposed to be kind. I write, stolidly, with the stub smoother than it looks. War exists because we confuse vigilance with suspicion. I let that sentence sit, then write another beneath it. Peace is vigilance on behalf of each other. I underline nothing. The paper knows what's important. The boy appears at the foot of my